We have with us today Matt Kennard, investigative journalist and author. You can look at Classified UK and elsewhere to find his writings. So thank you very much, Matt, for joining us today.
Cool, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess I think an insightful way I can talk about this is my experience studying in the US at two universities. First, University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, and then Columbia University in New York, because I think it gives a hint of what is coming here and what is happening to David Miller. So I went to UCLA in 2004, and I was a student journalist then. I was in my early 20s, and I became a columnist on the student newspaper there. And I actually started writing columns about Israel and about its relationship with the US. And it was really instructive what happened. I was actually literally and overtly warned off talking about it. And there was one particular case where in 2005, when I was there and I had this column, Norman Finkelstein, he was then a tenured academic. Actually, he was trying to get tenure, which was eventually stopped, but he was an academic at the University of Chicago, DePaul University. Anyway, he had written this book called Beyond Chutzpah, which had a whole section deconstructing Alan Dershowitz's book, The Case for Israel, basically showing large parts were plagiarized and it was all based on faulty academic work. And that column took a lot of work to even get in the paper. And then, subsequent to that, this shows you even a tiny bit of dissidence on this topic. What happens? Alan Dershowitz threatened to sue the student paper. It's called the Daily Bruin. Bear in mind, this is like a marginal paper that no one really reads. And then he demanded, well, he said he was going to sue, and then they said, what can we do? And they said, we'll have to write a letter. So they published a letter from Alan Dershowitz, which was basically just saying that the column was all wrong, which it wasn't. But I think that really gives an insight into how tightly the debate is controlled, and it was much worse in the US. And then subsequent to that, I went to Columbia University to do a master's, and I stayed in contact with Norman Finkelstein, and I was studying journalism there. And my teacher at the time was an editor at the New Yorker, and I said, one of our projects was to write a profile. And I said, I'd quite like to profile Norman Finkelstein. He lives in Coney Island, which was not that far from the university. And this is a literal recollection of what he said. He said, I wouldn't do that if I were you. Criticizing Israel in the US is like criticizing Mother Teresa, you'll never work in the media. So it was very literal. I was being warned off doing this. And actually, at that time, when I also studied in the UK at Leeds, and it was very different. The Palestine solidarity movement was very powerful on campus, and there were big demonstrations. There was an Israel Apartheid Week, which came under a lot of attacks, the usual attacks. But actually, I think what's happening in the UK is what has already been done in the US, which is just this squeezing out any freedom to talk on this issue. And it's a tried and tested technique, and it works. It's this attempt to smudge and blur the line between anti-Zionism or pro-Palestine solidarity and anti-Semitism. And what it is meant to do is impose a cost on anyone who speaks out. That's a personal, reputational, career cost. And it's people will tell you who work in the media, I don't self-censor on this topic. I don't hold back what I want to say. But it's not conscious in that sense. It's this constant attacks on anyone who raises their head above the parapet has an effect which isn't even conscious for a lot of people. And you see that with someone like Nathan Robinson, who was that Guardian columnist who made a flippant joke about Israel on Twitter and lost his column on the Guardian. This happened a couple of months ago, or maybe even a month ago. So and that was in the States. It's so tightly controlled. And that's because I believe that people are scared to defend the people that do put their head above the parapet, like David Miller. And actually, David Miller is an interesting case because a lot of the work I do is about the British establishment and the networks of power which exist in our society. And David Miller's power-based project, which is kind of a Wikipedia of all the different networks that operate across British society, is an invaluable resource. And in fact, he didn't get any sort of trouble like this when he was analysing lobby groups to do with tobacco or different foreign states. In fact, that kind of work was rewarded. As soon as he turned his eye to the Israel lobby, he was widely denounced as an anti-Semite. Well, we've seen it all, anti-Semite, etc., etc. So the lesson that is meant to teach any young academic, any young journalist is: look, if you want to work in the media, if you want to work in the universities, just don't talk about what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. And it's an outrage, because I've been to Palestine a couple of times, and when you see it for real, what is happening to the Palestinians, it's a life-changing event, because it's such a failure of humanity. You have, especially Gaza, which actually I wasn't even allowed into, but you've got 2 million people encaged in an open-air prison, everything about their lives controlled by hostile military power, which routinely bombs them and kills them with snipers when they try and demonstrate at the prison walls. It's just unbelievable barbarism, effectively, and yet there's a system of lobbying in place which instrumentalizes the poison of anti-Semitism to try and to defend it, which in itself is awful, because again, it makes real anti-Semitism much harder to fight if the waters are constantly muddied. But these pro-Israel lobby groups don't care. In fact, pro-Israel lobby groups and Israel itself cozies up to far-right regimes across the world. If you look at Latin America, where I've done a lot of work, the Bolsonaro regime in Brazil, they all love Israel. Argentina, I have family in Argentina. I spent quite a lot of time there. The junta in the 70s, 76 to 83, which was effectively a Nazi-influenced junta. Many of the Nazis fled to Argentina and were allowed to settle there. And the regime that came in, that there were actual real Nazis that were involved in devising torture techniques. They killed 30,000 people, and that was supported by Israel. That regime, they sold them arms. So I think the left needs to really understand that what is happening is there is an attempt to present this racist, brutal military power, which is occupying people in a brutal sense, probably even worse than apartheid South Africa. It's trying to present itself as a progressive cause, and we need to reject that every single time. And the way they do that is to make anyone who speaks up for Palestinians an anti-Semite, to make anyone who speaks up for Palestinians a racist. And of course, it's the inverse. It's an Orwellian construction, because Palestinians are the victims of a racist state. So I think that David Miller is the front line now, but as many people have said, this is never going to stop with David Miller. It didn't start with David Miller. He's just the latest target. They go down the line, and it's about Palestine and it's about Israel. It's not about anti-Semitism. So people need, and what they also try and do is make people suspicious. So they want people on the left and progressives to be suspicious of anyone who says, "Oh, I'm involved in pro-Palestine solidarity." They want the first thought to be, "Oh, maybe that person's an anti-Semite," and we need to reject that completely. Because if they succeed in imposing a cost on pro-Palestine solidarity, then we abandon one of the most silenced and most abused people in the world. So we all need to stand up for David Miller. We all need to stand up for academic freedom, which is vitally important. And we've kind of lost any kind of media freedom on this issue. So academia is the last sort of readout where we can get rational and clinical analysis of what is going on. So we can't let it go down. I'll just finish by talking about a case which happened to me again at university, which was when I was a young reporter. The first big story I really got was about a professor or a lecturer at Leeds who was a racist, a genuine racist. And I interviewed him and investigated his opinions, and it became a big story, got into all the main papers. And the university came under a lot of pressure to fire him. And at that time, I was under pressure to come out and say that he should be fired. And I wouldn't do it, because even though I found his views repugnant, academic freedom has to be defended for views that you don't like. Otherwise, you don't believe in it. Everyone believes in academic freedom for people they agree with. So obviously, this doesn't relate to David Miller's case because these are confected charges of anti-Semitism and racism. But even in cases where those charges are real, we would still defend the principle of academic freedom because academic freedom is vital. We can't have a university system where people are scared of talking out whatever their opinions because they think they'll get fired. It's just we need to maintain that, and of course we should really have the same situation in the media, but it's much worse there because the media is even more influential in society. So much more of the lobbying efforts go towards controlling the media. And obviously Jonathan Cook was a reporter with The Guardian once. The Guardian at one stage was pretty good on Israel-Palestine. But like so much over the last 10 years, it's lost its edge. So without that, the media is just basically 100% controlled in its coverage of Israel-Palestine.
Thank you, Matt. So we cannot rely at all on the mainstream media to understand what's happening in Palestine. I don't know if you're still there, Matt, to give any closing remarks. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Over to you for closing remarks, please. Thank you.
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Okay, let me try and. All right, that's not going to work. All right. I guess I'll just end with to talk about. Oh no, it's not working in the video. Academic freedom in general as a principle and how important it is, and how this issue, although obviously the proximate reason for the meeting is the case of David Miller and the attacks he's coming under, and effectively the campaign to get him fired. Universities in our society are one of the few institutions and parts of society left where there is lively dissent and a free exchange of ideas, and that is a problem for the powers that be, whether that be state power, corporate power. They have effectively, in the neoliberal period, in the last 25 years, colonized every single aspect of our society. Corporations are more powerful than ever now. They've really penetrated the media, culture, everything. And universities, of course, have been penetrated by corporations too. But there is this norm that respects academic freedom, and I think that is changing. And there is a concerted attack on academic freedom. And you see that with the lack of support for David Miller within the mainstream. I mean, even people who on the right, who claim to be against cancel culture and for free speech, you'd expect them to come up with and defend David Miller. You've hardly seen any defense of David Miller. In fact, all the mainstream columnists have come out and attacked him. So in that context, you see it's very worrying because if we lose universities as a free place and a free for free exchange of ideas, as people have mentioned, young people are going to stop being exposed to ideas which will help them form a rational analysis of society and will help them go into a world with values and principles which they need to be rounded people. So I think that we all need to support David Miller, obviously, but we need to understand this is part of a bigger assault on academic freedom by corporations, by state power, collectively, that can't succeed. We can't allow it to succeed.
Thank you, Matt.